Te mua whakatapu ki he kelekele tapuni. Kole ke hufanga he talamalu o e whanua. Whakatapu ki he hau eki o mea a. Whakatulo atu ki a haa taki lotu mo haa whaiwhekau. Tulo mo haa poto, haa punake, mo haa tauke. Kai ata mo oku ai whainga malie ni. Kole ke hufanga he whakatapu kua osi hono au whaki. Kole hoku ingoa ko mele whatai palavi. Ko hoku hingoa ko mele whatai. Ko hoku tau ua hiwa eni. Ko e kuwhae ko lasini pulu. Me kolonga mo taanea pe ko e kutamai ko viliami tupo malohi me haa wakatolo mo a wha. Na aku tupu hake I Levin pe mo Australia ka kua lolotonga nofo I o kalari nusila. Tua ofa atu and welcome everyone and to you Ellie. It's such an honor to be here and please bear with me, that was my first time doing that. Yeah, my hands are a bit sweaty right now, so welcome to all the newcomers and to everyone who is here to support Esiteli. Just a bit of housekeeping. So for those who want to keep your camera on, please just know that photos are taken. So if you don't want your photo taken, just keep your camera off. And also just beware if you've got your mic on, just to respect the space, and just know that, you know, we prefer for people to keep their mics on, but if you're going to have a loud background, then please mute it. And also please know that this Talanoa is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube. So we want you to come as you are. You're not required to come each week. And please know that you don't have to stay for the whole session. We do have a Google Classroom and also a Twitter page, as well as a Discord, which I'm sure those who are organizing those spaces will let you know in the comment section if you want to join. We also have a note taker who will be taking notes. So if you want to follow up and read through the notes in minutes, you're more than welcome to have access to that. We welcome friends and families, family members to the space, parents and any elders. We love having you join us, and just know that we're so excited to have our guest speaker. And also just making note, if any of you know or have someone in mind that you would like to join us in our Talanoa, please let us know, as we do have a guest speaker list. And Deli is our special person for this month. Woohoo! I'm going to shoo along because I don't want to talk too much. Now just give me a cue when I need to stop.
Oh, are you done? Are you done, Malafatai? You're doing great. Is this where I take the baton back? Is that what I'm doing? Okay.
Yes, please.
Okay.
I'm handing it over. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Malfatai. That was beautiful. Thank you for welcoming this space. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Emma, who will introduce Deli.
Hello everyone, Sioto o whakainga, ko le keu hufanga he whakatapu kua osi hono au whaki, ko hoku hingoa ko Emanita Alatini, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Welcome everyone to this space. I am so excited to introduce our guest speaker for today. I have known Theli since I was a wee undergrad at the University of California, Riverside, our side. And so Theli is one of the first people who helped me as I was reconnecting with the culture. She brought me into the Pacific Islander Student Alliance at UCR, where she did a big reckoning with the program. And so I am so grateful for her. And I'm going to read her professional bio because she professional, y'all. Okay, sorry. My bad. Esiteli Hafoka is a PhD candidate in the Religious Studies Department at Stanford University. Stanford, what? She received her MA from Stanford and her BA in Religious Studies and Ancient History from the University of California, Riverside. Esiteli's dissertation surveys Tongan historical narratives, ethnographies, social media, and personal interviews to argue that religion is essential to understanding Tongan collective identity in America. Her dissertation identifies religious threads connecting 19th century Methodist Christianity, Mormonism, national Tongan democracy, and Tongan Crip gang members in Utah. Esiteli's research reveals the ways Tongans navigate their racial identity in America through a religious epistemology and how, for Tongan Americans, religion and race are co-constitutional. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Esiteli to the stage.
Yay!
Yay!
Welcome.
Want to make it loud?
Thank you, Emma. Kola ke hufanga he whakatapu ko e so awhaki. Malalele kainga o ka Tonga Talanoa. Te uruaki o ato e ku whakamalo ki a tek motolu. Homo mea mai he poni. Ko hoku ingoa ko Esiteli Hafoka uhamaka. Ko e ku whae o ku hao me nā tātā mo ngā mnoho. Ka nane tupu hake I nuku alofa I tonga tapu. Ko ko tamai o ko hao me pukatala mo whakakai ka nane tupu hake I longa mapo I wawaulahi mo vaini. O ko toko tolu hoku whangatunga ane, pea toko taha hoku toko ua. Kwa o ko whika tolu I hoku family. Nā ko tupu hake I Stockton, California, ko e whanua tapu ai kau Yachakumi mo Miwok. O ko lolotonga ako I Stanford University, ko siemi ai tau e nima, I ko polokalama PhD I Religious Studies, kai toepe ke whagausi ko dissertation. For those of you who don't know me, I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Department of Religious Studies at Stanford University. I've reached TGR status, which is the equivalent of almost done. No. So yeah, I'm just in the dissertating phase, which is the fancy way to put it. So yeah, now did you want to just ask the questions and then we just kind of answer and then?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Can I start right now?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I'll just jump right in. Just for right now, for everyone, we are going to be reading over some questions that our group put together for Theli prior to this meeting. And then after we go through those questions, there's about 4, we will jump right into a Q&A section, the Q&A section where you can ask your questions in the chat, and then we'll just go in the order we receive it, and you can just read your question out to Theli. I think it's best to just read it out there, read it out loud, learn that from Alisi. So I'm gonna just piggyback off that, and we're just gonna read questions that are given in the chat once we come to that time.
Real quick now, sorry. I just wanted to kind of throw out there first, because I know people aren't really familiar with religious studies as a field of study, and an academic field of study. So just to kind of, I don't know, put it out there for those of you who don't know, who aren't familiar with the field. I wanted to quickly distinguish religious studies from the field of theology, because I know many of us know, have uncles and parents and cousins who are either theological students or pastors, reverends, bishops. So I'm letting y'all know I'm not going to become a pastor. That might disappoint some of y'all. But you wouldn't want to join the church that I start anyway. Or maybe you would, Emma, now. Because I'd be like the Reverend of Ratchetry, right? Y'all might like that. We might start a church someday soon. But yeah, so they're two different things, right? The academic study of religion, it explores the concept of religion from a variety of different perspectives. So within the field, there are kind of like these larger perspectives that have dominated over the last 200-ish years. So mainly like the philosophy of religion, scholars look at like the function of religion, and there's a particular field that I kind of like fall into called lived religion, right? And so lived religion just kind of looks at the beliefs and practices, experiences of followers in a particular community. So that's kind of what I do. And like Emma had so nicely read from my introduction, my bio, I look at Tongan American religiosity in my research. And my approach to religion has been like primarily through the lens of lived religion, with a theoretical focus on like critical race theory and decolonization. So I'm classically trained in the field of religious studies, and have engaged with like the classical writings from like Weber, Freud, Marx, Eliade, to name a few. But I've also engaged with writings from notable Pacifica scholars such as Esiteli Hafoka, Vince Diaz, Hokulani Aikau, and Manuani Meyer, to examine the function and the philosophy and the lived religion of Pacifica peoples. I've chosen to locate my work within the subfield of American religion and consider myself to be an American religion historian, whose primarily focus is on the nexus of race and religion in America. I'm Tongan American. Here in America, I'm identified by non-Tongans as Tongan, and when I'm in Tonga, I'm called an American. The 2 parts of my identity have yet to find balance, and I'm not really sure if any balance could or should be achieved, but I'm finding myself becoming comfortable with the discomfort, right? And I chose to work on Tongan Americans because I was trying to figure myself out. At the start of my undergraduate journey, I was sort of on this quest to fortify the Christian foundation I had chosen to build my life upon at that time. And it led me to take courses in religious studies without even realizing it. I began my undergrad journey as like an ancient historian, interested in early Christian communities, and I ended up coming out of undergrad with a double major. So while on this journey to find myself, I encountered some groundbreaking, belief-shaking challenges. Others who are stronger than I am would have stood firm while the foundation cracked beneath them. I wasn't so lucky. And as the foundation cracked, I flinched and became trapped within the larger cracks. So I choose to do research on Tongan Americans because I'm trying to understand myself. Part of understanding myself is understanding my role as a member of the collective Tongan and Tongan American community. As a former member of the LDS Church, as a former member of the SDA Church, as the eldest daughter in my family, and as a leader in my extended family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As Tongan and Tongan Americans know, our identities are multiplicitous, and I began to question which intellectual perspectives on Tongan life were being overlooked, like in my own research. And so for Tongans, religion is not at all overlooked, and we know that as Tongans, right? Religion, or let's just be real, Christianity, as the late Queen Mother Halai Valumata'aho claimed, is at the center of a Tongan person's identity. But the only debates about religion being had are like interdenominational, they're theological, or they're critiques of religion by scholars studying the multi-layered effects of colonialism and missionization in Tonga. So my dissertation, it pushes back against the notion that several things. Race is a fixed category that groups together people by like phenotype. I treat race as a process, something that can be accepted or rejected or compromised. It isn't fixed, it's fluid, and the way people, and the ways that people I highlight have been raced or race others, or have understood their own race based on their surroundings and the context is kind of what I look at. And so, yeah, that's just a little background on kind of what I do. And so then, yeah, now I think, unless there's questions or anything, anybody wants me to expand on anything, but that's like super just kind of the general gist of what does Deli do at Stanford? Who knows?
Thank you, Deli. Yeah, I'll just go right into the questions that I sent you. So the first question, for those who are joining in, we are starting our Q&A right now with Deli. So the first question is, what are your thoughts on Pacifica liberation theology?
Good question, and I think I know who that came from because Alici hosted a space for AAPI, so Asian American and Pacific Islander religious leaders to talk about anti-Asian racism, and I guess the theological approach to anti-Asian racism and anti-Black racism. And so, yeah, we talked a little bit like and we're messaging each other back and forth. And I was like, oh, maybe this is what you could talk about. And then the question came up and I was like, I know who sent that question. Okay. So anyway, so liberation theology, like most countercultural movements, like it appears in the 1960s, right? During a time when the world is like in the midst of decolonizing, or whatever that means, right? Because it doesn't really decolonize and the colonizers don't leave. So, but it's like the decolonial era, right? That's how historians like, anyway, we're starting to change things. But anyway, so it's kind of during that time. I think it's probably more accurate to say maybe it's not a decolonial period, but it's a time that scholars are starting to think about, you know, colonialism as having negative effects on people, right? Like, oh no, we must have done something wrong. So this is not to say that like scholars at the time, or even scholars before that, hadn't been thinking about liberation theology before the 1960s, but the 1960s kind of provided the methodological and theoretical like academic discourse to analyze the mess that is colonialism. So liberation theology was an attempt for colonized Christians of color to seek economic justice and political justice through their theology by rooting their religious belief in like this early form of Christianity that was heavily decentralized. So in this imperial setting where the structure of power is top down, these groups of people are starting to think of liberation theology as like bringing that power, concentrating it at the bottom and having a bottom up structure, right? And so it didn't, like I said, like liberation theology just didn't appear out of nowhere. Scholars had articulated notions of this liberation theology long before the 1960s. So the foundations of this investigation on the intersection of like race and religion were laid by brilliant 20th century scholars like W.E. Du Bois, E. Franklin Frazier, who detailed the function of Black churches for Afro-Americans, right? I'm using their words. These essential works cultivated the mid-20th century exploration of individual and collective identity formation among Black Americans against the backdrop of American Christianity. So this countercultural era of the 1960s and 70s provided historians with nuanced language to analyze the role of race in American history, religion and race in American history. Which welcomed, other scholars at the time like Eugene Genovese, James Cone, Albert Rabbitoe, to interrogate discourses of power, race, and religion. And so they argued that Black Christianity shaped and was shaped by American Christianity. Black theology was more authentic than white Christianity, and Black slaves created Christian practices in the invisible institution during the antebellum period, respectively. So Pacifica liberation theology appears in the decade following like liberation theology and Black liberation theology, thanks to one of its biggest proponents, Sione Amanaki Havea, who argued that Christian doctrine needed to be contextualized through Pacifica epistemology, and came up with the theory of coconut theology. So Havea claimed that since the coconut was essential to life for the Pacifica people, that it could be used to contextualize Christian doctrine. Had Christ come to the Pacific, he would have established a sacrament by using a coconut rather than bread or wine. So to Havea's mind, Christian doctrine and Pacifica epistemology were not at odds. Rather, that Pacifica people could reinterpret Christianity through their native lenses, right? Which would provide like the wherewithal to fully comprehend the principles of Christianity, which is what he was saying that they weren't fully comprehending. Now, to answer the question, that was all just kind of like, context to answer the question, kind of where I fall on, my view of Pacifica liberation theology. And so, I mean, personally, I think, and critics of Havea have also said the same, right? That the coconut theology kind of falls short, right? Like it doesn't fully give, I guess, Pacifica people, and maybe specifically Tongans, because he's talking about Tongans, the actual context, the full context. If you're looking at full Christian doctrine, it doesn't kind of nail all the points within Christian doctrine to translate something into like a Tongan epistemological, like Tongan understanding of all of the tenets of Christian doctrine. So it falls short there, and I think I agree with the critics, but I also think it falls short because it's not being honest about like Christianity being a product that comes from outside of Tonga, right? So like as a product coming from outside of Tonga, like you have to like, I mean like we're trying to indigenize it, but it's like, let's be real, like it comes from somewhere else. And then when it comes in a certain form. It's like packaged, specifically for a certain time period, right? Or it's gone through kind of the process of becoming what it is when it's introduced to Tonga in the 18th, 19th century. It's like a perfect little package that comes from somewhere that's not Tonga. And so part of buying into that, like into Pacifica liberation theology, I think has to be acknowledging that it's like coming from somewhere else. But anyway, so I don't want to go too long on that, but no, I'm going to go on a little longer. Sorry. Yeah, you have to buy into it, right? You have to buy into the fact that like it is a top-down structure, right? It's not decentralized. Like it is a thing and it's packaged as this thing. And so, I think that like the notion that there's some pure form of Christianity out there has been widely debunked by early Christian scholars. And they've identified these first 300 years, which coconut theology is trying to say like, and liberation theology is trying to say, within the first 300 years of Christianity, it was so decentralized and it was so perfect. And early Christian scholars have just kind of, they don't agree. So anyway, it wasn't decentralized. It's not this like pure perfect form of Christianity. But that is, so all of that just to say that I find it really interesting that Mormons have claimed Pacifica peoples are descendants of one of the lost tribes of Israel. I think that's fascinating. I also think it's like kind of in an effort to establish some sort of nativeness within Christianity through the genealogy of Judaism, right? So I think that just goes to prove how they are claimed in terms of contextual theology, is that there's a need for Tongans to like root themselves in that theological practice, right? But this particular rootedness for Tongans and for Pacifica people, I think, it's not merely just contextual. I think the Mormon example reveals that it's genealogical, right? They want to prove it. They want to prove that connection is in the blood. And so beyond that, I mean, I don't have much else to say about Pacifica liberation theology. I don't have much to say about how it should function in communities. But I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting to see. It's interesting to see the way that people have accepted or rejected it. I have a lot of friends who are in theological programs who we've had lively discussions about it. So yeah, I would just, probably the last thing I would have to say is, like, again, just reiterate the fact that, like, my interest in it is, like, kind of that genealogical rootedness. And so, so yeah. I hope that answered the question. That was a long-winded answer, sorry.
Thank you, Theli. Theli, we need, like, all of it, okay? I'm telling you right now, we need all of it. Do not hold back, okay? Just, if you feel like you're gonna hold back, bring it back, because we need all of it. Thank you. So the second question is, how did you decide what your research would be? And I'll connect 2 and 3. And have you had any pushback on your research from family, friends, or administration on your topic?
So this is going to be another long answer. So how did I mean, So, I mean, now in M&O, back at UCR, you know, they used to call me professor before I graduated. And, you know, they're like, oh, you're going to go get your PhD. And I feel like they kind of spoke that into existence, right? Like, but yeah, I've always been just kind of interested in teaching in a bunch of different contexts. And so, and I'll just share a quick story. So when I was in my last year at UCR, I was talking to the former head of my department, and I told her I want to go to a graduate program, and she's like, yeah, and religious studies, that's great. And so I told her, no, I think I'm just going to apply to a PhD program, and she's like, I don't think you're ready for that. And I was like, oh, and she's like, yeah, I think you would be better served if you went to a master's program first, right? And at the time, I was like, yo, that was like a knife to the heart. That hurt, because she was a mentor. She was someone who I looked up to. She's somebody who really helped me, you know. But what I didn't realize was that, you know, she wasn't trying to be a hater. She didn't, it's not that she didn't have faith in me. She was just realizing some of, like, the larger challenges I would face, because I really wasn't. I don't think I was prepared. I don't think I was that prepared to enter a PhD program. So I took like a year to just kind of think about what I wanted to do. But I felt discouraged though. I was hurt. I was hurt after that. So I reached out to her when I kind of thought about what I was going to do. Initially, I was going to stick to kind of the ancient period and look at Christianity in the early Christian era, 0 to 300, 0 to 400 CE. And then I was also involved, this is where I met Alici and a lot of the EPIC folks. I met EPIC. I started volunteering at Saturday Tongan Education Program at Pomona. And I just was like really passionate about, like, you know, getting in touch with kind of, you know, I was interested in getting rooted too, right? Like, so I kind of changed the course of my thinking and thought, like, I'm going to go into something with Pacific Islander religiosity, maybe Tongan religiosity, and I ended up applying to programs there. And so I reached out to the professor who told me I should go to a master's program first. And I asked her to write me a letter of recommendation. And of course, she's like, of course, I'll write you a letter of I got you, you know, whatever. And I think I heard from someone at a different school that she said one of the most, like, beautiful, like, letters of recommendation for me. And they said that it was as if, like, her caring for me really jumped off the page, right? Like, he said that he could read the affection on that paper. And so that really touched me. And I was like, you know what? She wasn't hating on me. She had my back, right? Like, she was pushing me to really figure out what I wanted to do. And I think she probably saw that the passion wasn't there for me to do like early Christian stuff, even though in one of my qualifying exams I did look at early Christian communities, but I was looking at kind of identity formation among like early Christians from 0 to 4th century CE. But anyway, yeah, so that's kind of what pushed me into this direction. And the pushback, y'all. So I'll be honest right now. Like, this is something, me talking to y'all is something that I've been fearful of for the last 5 years. I've shared with my advisor, and she's on the call, at every step of the way that I'm most afraid of my community. Partly because what I'm offering has to benefit the community, right? I'm not researching Tongans, I'm researching with Tongans, right? Like, this is all of us. Like, it's not just me at Stanford, it's all of us. And so if I bring something to the table for y'all and present it, and then y'all are like, nah, I don't buy it, then what I'm gonna do is throw the whole thing away and we'll figure it out, right? We're gonna figure something else out. So that's kind of, been one of my biggest fears. But I'm really trying to think about the pushback. So in the academic field, in my academic world, I don't get too much pushback, partly because what I'm talking about in terms of religio-racial identity formation is kind of a thing in American religion, and it has been a thing over the last 5 years, and it's a growing thing. And so people are jumping on board. There's it starts off with Judith Weisenfeld, who writes this book, New World Coming, and it's kind of grown since then. And so there's roundtables on the topic, and I'm just kind of joining in on the conversation 5 years later. But it's still a very, very important conversation. In my, so maybe not community, but family, right? So like, so I've been afraid, hesitant fearful to present this to the community, but I kind of tested it out with my dad. Anything that I write on paper, I want it to be intelligible to both the academic community and my dad, right? So those are kind of the two audiences that I'm like writing for. And also, of course, the Tongan community. And so my dad, like if my dad can't read it, then throw the thing away, right? Like I'm not trying to do that, right? Like it's been tough to try to cram a bunch of like theoretical ideas into a paragraph and then present it, like articulate it in a way that my dad would understand. And so it's kind of going back and forth between those two things. So I took like a 10-year break. I dropped out of college in 2000, and then I went back in 2009. So during those 9 years, I was an electrician for my dad. My dad has an electrical company. They do residential wiring in homes and stuff. So I was a residential electrician for 10 years. So I still do it. And sometimes when I get bored of writing, I get tired of writing, or get tired of school, I hop in the truck with my dad. And, we take a drive to the Bay Area. And so between here and Oakland is like 60 miles, but it takes like an hour and a half because of traffic. And me and my dad will just sit in the truck and just chop it up, And so, I asked him, one time, or I told him, he asked me what I'm doing in school, and I told him, I'm looking at Tongan identity formation. And he goes, okay, what's that mean? And then I have to break it down to him, because if I can break it down to him, then I understand what I'm doing, right? And he sat silent for a while when I was like, talking about all the stuff, right? And he sat there for a while, and I was like, are you going to say anything? And he was like, no, I just never thought about it like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I thought, like, maybe in a larger conversation with the community, if I get that type of response, silence, and then, oh, I've never thought about it like that. I was like, I hope it produces it generates more conversation, right? And then ultimately it did with me and my dad. And so I was hoping to kind of replicate that with the community. I hope my dad was representative of enough of the community that I would kind of have the same experience. So I could answer that question maybe later, a month down the line after this community conversation, to see if I should keep going or if I should just throw it away. So y'all tell me. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to throw it away. So, so the next question was, how do you see your topic help furthering academia or the world? Do you want to answer that at a later time? Because it's kind of like a similar-ish.
Yeah, I mean,
you want to answer it?
Yeah, I can answer it. I mean, it's so like Emma was saying earlier, my dissertation surveys Tongan historical narratives, ethnography, social media, Talanoa, our oral histories, to understand the role of religion in producing a Tongan American identity. And I use the thread of religious identity to make connections between 19th century Methodist Christianity, that's the form of Christianity that's originally introduced to Tonga, Mormonism. And I focus on Mormonism because Tongans who come and migrate to America, so the first group of Tongan settlers in Utah are Mormon, right? They come and they go to BYU. And so Methodist Christianity, 19th century Methodist Christianity, Mormonism, National Tongan Democracy, and Tongan Crip gang members in Utah. So National Tongan Democracy, the way I talk about kind of, I guess, religio-racial identity formation in that context is to understand Tonganness. And so I look at kind of what's going on right now with the democratic push in Tonga over the last, when was it, 2012, so 10 years. Democratic representation, the structure, the social hierarchy, and the social structure of Tonga, how it's kind of been for over 1,000 years. I'm looking at those two clashing, right? Democracy and Tongan, I call it anga-fafonua, right? Because I don't think culture fully encapsulates what that is, but we'll call it anga-fafonua. And democracy are clashing. And in this clash, this group and this group are kind of they're vying for power through an acknowledgement of Tonganness. So democracy, this is a Western product. Why are you bringing this Western stuff into Tonga? We're Tongan. The reason why we're able to maintain sovereignty in the Pacific is because of our monarchy. It's because of our social hierarchy. It's because of this. And so I see that clash, right? So that clash between the two, are the cultural capital that's being built up on both sides. These sides are using kind of religion, right? This import of Christianity, or God has deemed the King Tupo is the most, superior person in Tonga and has blessed them with all of the knowledge and all of the wherewithal to take care of Tonga. So this is why, like, God blessed him, and when he gave the island to God, that kind of established Tonga, the relationship between Tonga and God, right? So people on the monarchy side are saying, this is great, God chose this. And then people on the democracy side are saying, wait, Jesus Christ was like this. And Jesus Christ, so they're looking at kind of the liberation theology, this kind of rhetoric that says, oh, Christ is not rich and Christ does not do this, and so so again, right, they're clashing. But in that clash, I'm seeing threads of the same thread of religious identity formation that's kind of being used to acknowledge which side has cultural capital, which side is more Tongan, which side is more whatever, right? Practices the Anafafonua correctly or something, right? And and then the Tongan Crip Gang in Utah. So you have like first and second generation Tongan Americans, and these are not the Tongan settlers, right? These are their kids. And you have them settling in a state that has, over the last 150 years, gone through its own sort of racialization, right? So I look at like the Mormon church, and I look at the history of the racialization of Mormons in the state of Utah, like when it was still a territory, into statehood. And then I look at kind of what Mormons become after they were racialized for 150 or 120, 30 years. What they become in the 1960s when Tongans settled there. What version of Americanness are they encountering? And how are they acculturating in America? Who are they learning from? Where do they see American, right? And how do they learn to become American is kind of what I'm looking at from the 1960s. And so 1960s, 70s, 80s, 90s, you have the arrival or establishment of the Tongan Crip Gang in Utah, even though it started in LA. This version of it in Utah is at odds with a Mormon state. And so I look at religious identity formation on the Mormon side, and I look at religious identity formation on the Tongan side, especially on the Tongan Crip side, and then I kind of analyze what's going on there, right? Mainly because, and the case that I focus on, or the cases that I focus on, is the RICO charges, right? The Racketeering Influence Corruption Act against the TCG. So the RICO Act was originally created to combat like the mafias, like back in the 70s and the 60s. And like, yo, TCG ain't no mafia. What kind of, we're talking about like the mafias running casinos, guns, like drugs. They robbed a Jack in the Box. Come on, like that's all I'm saying, right? Like, I'm saying it's not right for the TCG to be charged with RICO, but there's a reason. There's a reason why they're charged with RICO, and religion has a lot to do with that, right? So those are the connections that I'm trying to make in my work. The larger argument in my dissertation is that for Tongan Americans, religion and race are co-constitutional. That is, religion and race kind of create each other, right? So yeah, that's. I think it's important, right? Like I said that I'm doing my own research. I've done this research, or this research kind of started in my mind because I was trying to understand myself, and I feel like I'm not the only one who might feel like this, right? Like other Tongan Americans might kind of resonate with what I'm feeling. So that's why I do what I do.
Oh yeah.
So George.
Elisa, we'll just go right into the Q&A. Elisa, did you want to read your question or ask your question?
I'm sure other people have questions. It was more a comment than anything. The Patoa folks on Facebook are, mainly made up. I mean, I know that they're in New Zealand and Australia, but it's really like the core group is here in America, and they're so loud about, like, political identity and democracy and like fighting against the parliament in Tonga. And it's interesting they brought that up. It wasn't really a question. I was
No, and I'm glad you brought that up, because actually I follow in my dissertation the leader of the Patoa here in America, which is Tilila Walker. So yeah, I think it's an important chapter. It's kind of like the trajectory, right? Like looking out and looking forward. I don't want to say forward, looking out, right? Now we're looking out, we're looking to kind of what's to come, and yeah, I think it's really going to tell us a lot about the trajectory for Tongan Americans, but also because it's like Tongan Americans are participating in national Tongan democracy, right? They have a huge hand, a huge influence in all of that. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you, Deli. The next question is coming from Lisa. So if Lisa, if you want to unmute yourself and ask, you can now, please. Or you can type it. Sorry, Lisa. You can go ahead and type it and I can read it out. I just saw your message. Well, while Lisa is typing out their question, Deli, something came up when you were talking about, like, when I read your bio was how did you come across like the relationship with the Tongan Crip gang and like Christianity? Was this like something you came about like during your research at Stanford, or was this something that interested you before?
So I think it definitely came out of kind of what I was working on at Stanford. So it's, you know, as a PhD student, we have these things called qualifying exams. And so you have to kind of prove your expertise in 2 or 3 fields. Mine was 3 fields. And so you read upwards into like, I mean, I've seen people who had lists 300 books long. Mine was about 250, maybe a little more. So as I was kind of reading through all those books, and after reading Judith Weisenfeld's book in 2016, I'm like reading for my qualifying exams kind of right when I start all the way up until my 3rd year. And so, you know, I'm thinking about it with every book that I read in the fields of American religion, Pacific Islander studies, and early Christian identity formation, right? Like, So yeah, I was just like really thinking deeply about Tongan identity, not merely about like what it was, but what it was at different points in different contexts, right? I had to like reconceptualize like how I could gauge what being Tongan meant and how that could be measured. And so there's 2 books that were kind of that opened my eyes to what the history of racialization of Mormons, kind of what happened in 100 and just under 150 years. And what Max Perry Mueller and W. Paul Reeves argue is that Mormons were a group that was racialized, right? They're white. For anyone who knows Mormon history, the original Mormons were white. But the federal government, the U.S. federal government, and this is in pre kind of statehood, right, in Utah. This is, I guess, like kind of before they migrated from like Missouri to Utah, and then while they're in the territory of Utah, they're racialized as not white. And so they spend about 100 years trying to become white, right? Trying to convince the federal government that like, we're not, you know, I mean, in actual depictions of Mormons, they were drawn as people of color, as Black people, right? Because the federal government couldn't get behind polygamy, because they couldn't get, you know, behind like kind of these esoteric practices in temples. They couldn't get behind a lot of these things, and they thought Mormons were weird. And so you know, so the names of the books are Race in the Making of Mormon People by Max Perry-Mueller and Religion of a Different Color by W. Paul Reeves. Those are two great, fantastic books. One is kind of talking about how Mormons were racialized from the outside, and that's Religion of a Different Color by Reeves. And then Max Perry-Mueller talks about how Mormons themselves racialized like themselves and others, right? And like themselves as in like Mormons, right? Themselves as white people and non-white people as Mormons. There was an argument that like in approaching the 1950s that Mormons should kind of come together more as and identify more as a religion than as like ethnic groups, right? Like your religion comes first before your race or your ethnicity. And so that's kind of what I was looking at. I was thinking about, I read another book by Carolyn Chen. Dang it, the name is slipping. I'll have to look it up. But she talks about how Taiwanese Americans kind of acculturated in the U.S. They learned to become American through becoming Christian. And also Buddhist and different like religions, but that kind of framework that she set up really got me thinking about, you know, how when I was watching this documentary called Tuku Fonua, and it came out I think back in like 2007 from the Mormon Church, and the late Queen Mother Halaivalu Mata'aho said, you know, in the video, at the center of each Tongan person's identity is Christianity. And that blew my mind. I was like, yo, then what were Tongans before Christianity came? Like, are they Tongan? You know what I mean? Like, those kind of questions I don't think would have popped up in my head had I not read Carolyn Chen, had I not read Judith Weisenfeld or Paul Reeves or Max Perry-Mueller and a host of other scholars in like American religion. But you know, I started thinking about that. Like, then like I don't understand that. Like, so does it mean that only at the point of conversion is Christianity is supposed to be at the center of every Tongan person's identity? Or does this mean like, or does it mean like if you're not Christian, then you're not Tongan? Like that's, you know, so all of these questions are like popping around in my head, and I was like, yo, your girl was like confused. I was like floored. I didn't know what to think. I mean, anyway, but that's kind of where that's the germ of my investigation. That's kind of where it comes out of.
Thank you, Deli.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next question. What is the best way for American Tongans to advocate for our LGBTQ family members to have place and space within religion and within our culture?
That's a great question. And I'm just gonna. That's a good question. So I took a course with one of the early Christian scholars in my department, and it was on sex in the early church. And so as an expert, you know, he's kind of going through and showing us that a lot of these like sexual taboos in the Bible are not a thing. They're not like a theological thing. They're not even really true. Some of the kind of hot Bible quotes that people use to condemn like LGBTQ plus lifestyles were likely written in by scribes, and not even part of like the original text, right? And so I think part of combating that is, dude, Tongans just love like hashtag facts, right? You got to come at them, especially in theological debates. You got to come at them with like hardcore facts, and that's a fact. a fact that you can like actually go and cite, you know, and y'all give, you know, my email out, and I'll go back in my notes and give you an actual citation from early Christian scholars who say that is an addition that doesn't flow in the narrative that it's the Bible verse is found in. So it doesn't flow. And because it doesn't flow, scholars have said that doesn't go there. That is likely, you know, an addition by a scribe who just didn't like women, who didn't like, you know, people to just live their free life. I don't know, but you know, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, you know, it's hard with Tongans, and I assume it'd be hard with like Samoans. It's harder with Pacifica people who just, Christianity is at the center of their identity. You know what I mean? Like, you're tearing something up. But remind them that this is a specific form of Christianity that's boxed up nicely, a bow tied around it, and presented to Tonga, right? Like, that version of Christianity took over 1,000 years to create and to put in that box, right? And so, I don't know, y'all. Like, I try not to step on toes, you know, with my scholarship. But you know what? The conversation about, you know, inclusivity with like LGBTQ plus communities, I mean, you know, there's going to be a whole lot of toe stomping, you know, happening, I think. And that's just it. Like, and my suggestion would just be, you know, put your Timberlands on. Put your Timberlands on and stomp some toes. You know what I mean? Pull out the facts, pull out the receipts, because there are receipts available, you know. And I think once you present some of those things to people, you might just be forcing their minds open with like you know, I don't know, the jaws of life. You know, that might be, you know, the tool that you'll have once you start going after. But it's people get sensitive about that, you know what I mean? Because it's kind of at the core of our community, right? Like, you find a Tongan community by going to the churches, right? You find certain connections by making like these kind of connections to religion and religious practice, and, you know, so yeah, that's my advice. Be careful, but, you know, go out stomping with your Timbs on, you know what I mean? Like, the Yate boots.
I feel like it reminded me when you mentioned the documentary that you watched. What was and the person said like what were Tongans before Christianity, something like that. It reminded me of like the hymn that I have from like the Methodist Church, and it says like you know, I'm sure like this is in like other religions too, that like God comes first and then like family, and then it's like, now I'm thinking, so if Tongans were like before Christianity came, was it just family? Like what was next, or what was before family? So I'm like, I feel like I have to like rethink my identity, because it was like really rooted in Christianity, and like I talked about that a lot in a lot of papers and stuff. So I'm like, oh shit, was I like lying to myself?
No, the thing is, like, you're not lying to yourself, right? Because that is the truth. That, you know, you're presenting something that's like totally factual, completely factual. So I took two Tongan language courses, which I think this group is great, by the way, because I just love the fact that, you know, we can have these spaces where we're learning the language. But I took 2 semesters of summer language training in Tonga with Sua Laftani at Lo'au University. And we talked a lot about like language, right? Ancient language. And so I told them, you know, like you're reading me like this word that says setesi for sentence, you know, or kalama for grammar. And I was like, I'm gonna need some Tongan words. Like, I don't want this, you know. So we came up with our own words, pupunalea, like for sentence, or you know, we don't call kalatua or culture kalatua, we call it angafafonua. And so we came up with these because, you know, get that transliteration out of here. Yeah, you know, these like Tongan cognates for English words just don't cut it, right? And I think it's the same for, you know, there's something that's lost in translation, and it's not just, you know, in words like grammar or structure or anything like that. Latu, eki, otua. You know what I mean? Like those are Tongan words. You know, it's not, and those have meaning, and it was a different meaning, like a pre-Christian meaning, right? But then they kind of stick around. You know, we still use them today, right? But part of my like taking off the rose-colored glasses, like I'm not looking for like this pure form of Tongan Angafagvanua, pre-Christian Tongan Angafagvanua. Part of the method for looking at that, and looking at like Tongan Angafagvanua, Tongan life, is applying like a Tongan methodology, right? So we have the Tava theory of spatial reality, which is awesome, you know. But I think the tendency for people to use that kind of is perpetuating this like romanticized notion that like things were so perfect and you just, you know, like if my daughter was here, she'd be like doing little ballerina twirls. But I think it wasn't like that, you know what I mean? Like, just to be like completely brutally honest, it wasn't like that. This top-down structure that we have with the monarchs, the nobles, and the commoners, that's been around for 1,000 years, like, you know. And that structure, that top-down structure, has been a thing in Tonga for Tongans for 1,000 years. And it's still super relevant today, right? And so I think, like, if we're looking at things that, like, that we lose in interpretations between, like, Tongan and English, we stick with the Tongan, you know what I mean? Like, we stick with the Tongan because we need to make sure that our Tongan community understands that, like, it's hard for us to describe this kind of social practice in English because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't translate in terms of like American values. Why do you value your family that much? That's so weird. Why do you worship your dad's sister? That's so weird. Your mother's way more important than your dad's sister. She raised you, you know, and so they don't understand these things. But as Tongans, we understand it, right? We understand that it's like part of a larger system. And that system is all about power imbalance, right? But we're multiplicitous, so we have power imbalances inside of us in various forms. We're eki on one side, we're tu'o on another side, right? You're both at the same time. Anyway,
thank you.
Sorry, I went on a tangent with that.
That's great.
Yo, bars.
I'm just
Bars.
Let me scroll up to read the next question. Give me 1 second. Okay, no, not that question. Okay. What is your advice to Tongan religious leaders now in the States on going about a positive approach to present tapu topics in their religious circles? And then this is for, I guess for context, this is for Tongan religious leaders who want to present tapu topics but may not know the best approach and are looking for one.
Yeah, I don't. again, kind of like in the matters of theology, I kind of take a step back. I don't have any good advice because I'm, like I said, like y'all join my church. We'd be the church of the ratchetry. Like I'm not, we got our Timbs on. We're stomping on toes. We're not being nice. We're inclusive. Everybody can join the church. I don't have. So I'll just share kind of my experience. So I've talked to a bunch of young Tongan pastors, and old ones too, who've been in the game for 20 plus years. And I hear a lot. What I hear from them is that we need to just leave the Tongan cultural stuff like on the side. We just need to practice this Christianity and keep it pure Christianity. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I don't know how you do that, but good luck, and so maybe, I don't know, maybe it's about taking when you go to therapy, there's like you got to take a hard look in the mirror and see that real person that's staring back at you with all of the good and all of the bad and whatever it is. And I think that might be what we need, for our religious leaders to take a hard look in the mirror, and see kind of all the good and all the bad and figure out. Yeah, I just don't have a good answer because no one would take my advice. None of the religious leaders would take my advice. I think I'm too far out there because, like I said, like we could just start a church. How about that? Let's just start a church, and then.
What we're doing right now is this year.
Right? I think so. I think that's what we're doing. We're gonna start a church. Wow, black
candles. George, we'll just go on to the next one. George, yes. Do you want to read your question?
Yes, please. Scrolling, sorry. Down arrow. What advice would you give people / me who are struggling to find their Tonganness apart and away from culture and religion? Yeah.
George, that's such a good question. And I think you've kind of summed up my own journey, right? I'm still trying to figure that out. And I think the overall kind of academic overlooking of religion outside of a theological context might help, right? Like, so the kind of history of academics looking at Tonga and saying, this is religious and this is political and this is economic and this is whatever, that's not how Tongan epistemology works. Prior to kind of the introduction of Christianity, those things, like I said, are anafafonua. There's no distinction between those things. They all work together all at once. And so maybe, I don't know if this might work, but maybe starting from that point in like your own mind and just thinking about how those distinctions don't exist and that it's okay to talk about politics or religion at the dinner table, and it's okay to, think or do things a certain way that other people just might say, like, you're not supposed to do that here, you're not supposed to be like that here. Maybe just kind of removing those distinctions, those hard lines between those categories might be a good start. I mean, but while doing that, also acknowledging that there are hard and fast like rules in Tongan anga whanua, right? Like there is a hard and fast social structure. There are, you know, tiers that have a higher amount of cultural capital than others. Not romanticizing the past, right? Not romanticizing like the pre-Christian Tongan past. I would suggest reading Esiteli Hafoka, all of his works, all of them. Tales of the Tongans, Kisses in the Netherlands is fabulous. It's supposed to be like a critique of NGOs, but I think what he's doing is like, I mean, you could totally tell, even if you didn't know, even if you were Tongan living in, I don't know, under a rock and didn't know Esiteli Hafoka was Tongan, but you read Kisses of the Netherlands, right? You would say, he's talking about Tongans. Or you read like, you know, Tales of the Tongans. Man, he's talking about Tongans. You know, it would jump off the page at you. And so I would say like read Esiteli Hafoka, like all of his writings. That should give you a sense of kind of both the values of Tongans and also the critiques of those values, like all at the same time. And then spaces like this, like, you know, where you can get in touch with the Tongan language, other Tongans, you know, to kind of sit around in the trenches with. And reading other Pacifica work too, pretty widely. Like Hokulani Aikau writes a fabulous book on Hawaiian Mormonism, which is great. And then Manulani Meyer, if you're trying to kind of connect with that inner indigenous native epistemology, she does great stuff on holographic epistemology. And Vince Diaz writes this amazing book called Repositioning the Missionary. And so that kind of gives you an idea of how, in your mind, if you kind of switch the perspectives from like centering Christianity or centering Christian narratives of Tongans to centering Tongan narratives that center Tongan people and Tongan culture and Tongan things, that getting your mind to kind of do that mental gymnastics, like those mental exercises, might help, George. I mean, it's helped me. So I don't know if it'll help everybody. I can just share what's helped me. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Deli. Alice, do you want to read your question? I'll just type it here so you don't have to scroll up.
You can just read it now. I don't.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. How did spending time learning the language detract from your scholarship and ways of framing your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think like the conversations that I had with my language professor, so like we would go for about 3 hours a day, 5 days a week for like 1 year it was 2 months and another year was 6 weeks. And it was in like the 15-minute breaks. We'd take 2 15-minute breaks every day in those 3 hours. And that's where, like, you know, this academic discourse is happening between me and him, because I introduced this Tongan Religio of racial identity formation. And then we just go at it for 15 minutes, like while we're standing outside on his porch smoking a cigarette. Like we're just going at it for like a cool 15 minutes, and he would be like on time. Once that 15 minutes was up, regardless of whether or not like either of us was in mid-sentence or whatever, okay, sorry, you know, you know, like we're gonna keep going, you know, in the classroom. So anyway, it was kind of in those spaces, in those 15-minute spaces, that I learned to kind of reconceptualize this non-Tongan concept of like the religio racial, right? This non-Tongan theory. I learned to kind of reconceptualize that in a Tongan framework. And so again, you know, the kind of interconnectedness of everything. It's like fihi. I think that's like the best way to describe something, right? Fihi. If you've ever heard the word fihi, right? Like your mom when she's brushing your hair and you're little, and then she's like, oh, fihi. Like your hair is so tangled, right? And it's hard to detangle. So it's that fihi. Those things, all of like anafofonua, that's what it is. It's just fihiness, right? Fihiness. I'm just making up new words. But I think like again with the terms like lotu, otua, tapu, like you can't understand those in just like purely religious terms, right? So like religion is a social practice or something. Like it's not just that. It's all wrapped up in politics. It's all wrapped up in economics. So you have like the addition, you have the Tui Tonga line, and then you have the addition of the Tui Hatakalawa, right, to the ruling lineages. So you have a separation. Siona Latu Kefu describes it as a separation between the sacred ruler. So the Tui Tonga is a sacred ruler and the temporal ruler, both at the same time. So when he splits his role, he maintains the sacred rulership, and then he gives the Tui Hatakalawa line the temporal rulership, right? So the two were one. The two were one thing before, right? And then they split. So you can't, from Tui Tonga line all the way, from the start of the Tui Tonga with Ao all the way to what, like 16th century? That's 1,000 years. You can't understand Tongan Anafofonua without understanding all of the fihiness, right? And so that's like one thing kind of the language reveals. The language reveals that it's all fihiness. And then it splits again, right, with the Tuikanopolo line, right? So then even in that split, like that second split, there's still the understanding of like socioeconomics, economics, the way that the bottom tier of the social structure, the commoners, support the monarch, support the nobles, to keep that kind of triangle structure intact. Because without the people acknowledging that they're at the bottom rung of the societal ladder, the ladder doesn't exist, right? Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get too philosophical on everybody, but another kind of thing that the language helped me out with was the method I wanted to approach my research with. And so looking at kind of the 1,000 years of Tongan like practice of the Anafofonua, what I realized is that like one of the kind of sustaining features is the whakatapu. And I love that you guys did the whakatapu, and I knew that you would, which is why I didn't even write one out. I was just like, cool, whakatapu, but it's the whakatapu. Why do you guys do the whakatapu? Why does the group do the whakatapu? Why do you do a whakatapu in church? Why do you do a whakatapu at any gathering? Why? Right? So we question why the whakatapu. We do the whakatapu to kind of release the taboos, right? Because at the end you say, whatever, so I can talk about, so the space is clear, so I can now talk. I've acknowledged everyone from the top down, because the whakatapu has to go in hierarchical order, right? You start from the top, you work your way down. So it's not just vertical though, it's also horizontal, because at the end, you include everybody, right? And then whakatapu to everybody else that's here whose names I'm not going to name individually, but you're all still important, right? And so it's both vertical and horizontal, and it's inclusive. But, you know, the question is, why do we still use the whakatapu? Even with the introduction of Christianity, it did not stop us from using the whakatapu. We just put the Whaitaka's name in the whakatapu, right? We gave them a tier. We gave them a tier in the whakatapu, right? So anyway, what I'm saying is the whakatapu is important. And the whakatapu has been a sustaining feature in Tongan Talanoa for over 1,000 years. So the only way that I feel like I can approach my research is with some sort of lens through the whakatapu, using whakatapu as a lens, right? So I came up with a method and just called it the whakatapu method because I'm not creative. There's a lot of people out there who's creative, but I'm not creative, right? So, you know, I'm acknowledging the fact that there is a social hierarchy. I'm acknowledging that, right? But I'm also acknowledging that Tongans acknowledge that. And Tongans, even if you've lived here in America forever, you know, and you approach a space, you're in a space, you share a space with someone who has a higher social status than you, what you gonna do when they won't shut up? What are you going to do when they go on for 10 minutes? Because I've been in a space where someone like a Hawaii comes in and they talk for 20 minutes, like without taking a breath. I'm like, breathe, take a drink of water. You know, but what do you do? What do? You don't do nothing. You don't do nothing because your inner Tonganness tells you, you better not. That's a Hawaii. You better just and just be respectful for our papa. You know, but what I'm saying is why do we do this? You know, why do we do this? Why Tongan? Why do we do this? Man, because that whakatapu is important, because that social structure is important, because that hierarchy is important. Why is it important? You know, those are kind of the things I'm trying to tease out. And even if I can't necessarily pinpoint why it's important and why the importance remains, I know that it exists, right? And I know that it has to be acknowledged, right? And so, I mean, what I do is just kind of acknowledge it and try to figure it out, but I'm kind of in the midst of that right now. That's what the dissertation's doing, kind of in the theoretical, methodological explanation in the introduction. So anyway, I'm so sorry, y'all. That was a lot.
Thank you, Deli. I'm just doing a quick time check. It's 6:32.
Yeah.
If anyone has any dying questions or comments to ask, feel free to interrupt me.
I know Lisiate asked, I think Malefihi, I can't read the whole name, is Latu Kefu's work available online? It's not. You have to buy the book. The local library might have it. Your school library should have it, and if they don't, you can go through the inner library loan system. And it is kind of expensive. Another really good book, and I suggest this to everybody, but it's really expensive, is the Biography of Queensland. So even though it presents itself as a biography, just in the title, the Biography of Queensland by Elizabeth Wood Ellam, it's fantastic. It is an exceptional work of Tongan history. And so you'll have Latu Kefu, who takes it from 9th century all the way to the late 19th century, early 20th century. And then Elizabeth Wood Ellam, she takes off from the early 20th century into the 1970s. And so if you want a good kind of maybe two bookends to 19th and 20th century Tongan history, or actually 9th century, 10th century Tongan history all the way to 20th century, pick up those two books. You won't be sorry. And this is another interesting fact, right? So Latu Kefu was commissioned by Queen Talote to write his history, right? And then Elizabeth Wood Ellam someone else is commissioned to write Queen Salote's biography. Then she dies and she doesn't get to do it. And then Elizabeth Wood Ellam, who has that kind of these personal connections, her dad used to be the Faifekal for Queen Salote, and so she becomes a historian. She picks up the all of the journals and the notes and everything from the woman who was supposed to write the biography. And these notes and everything are directly from Queen Salote herself. Queen Salote informs Sinalatu Kefu of 10th to 20th century or 19th century Tongan history. And so what you're essentially reading is Queen Salote's history, her version of history, right? Her story. So that's why I suggest everybody just like cop that, because I mean, but it's really expensive. If you can read it from the library or something, I mean, check it out from the library. I would. I finished the biography in like 2 days. It's a read. Like, you don't want to put that thing down. And when I talk about like the important role of religion, like you'll see it in Queen Salote's biography. You see it in Sinalatu Kefu's book, and so you know that it's important to her, right? So yeah, I would definitely recommend checking those out.
Thank you, Kelly. A few folks have asked about notes. I just wanted to make sure, just to point it out that no one's taking notes right now, but since this is being recorded, this will be available on YouTube for you to check out all the authors and books that were mentioned.
Yo, if the Fight House catch wind of this, you know, they're gonna come after. That's where the church are gonna. For the church are about to start. No.
They might want to come to our church. We don't know.
They might.
To this.
We need somebody to be in charge of taking applications. George.
And I like church. I love Jesus.
If there isn't any questions at this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Lisiate to introduce Saya.
All right. Thank you so much, Steli. I can listen to you talk for days, like they were saying in the chat. But siya to whakainga ko hokingoa ko Lisiate malefihivuna. Ko saya tuitai na whaele I Tonga na ne tupuhake I Tamaki makaurau Aotearoa. Ko ne tamai ko shone tuitahi me Pukotala Hano I Hapai. Ka ko ne whae ko tupo halaholo tuitai me pea mo maufanga. Ko e tau eni e taha e ako whaiva whangu mo ngaohi whangu Saya. Saya Tuitai is the son of Shona Tuitai from Pukatala Hano and Hapai, and his mother is Tupo Halaholo Tuitai from Pea and Maufanga. He was born in Tonga and raised in Tamaki Makarau, Aotearoa, and he's been practicing Whaiva Whangu and now he's Whangu for the past year. And yeah, I'll go ahead and give it to Saya.
Malo Lisiate, Malo, thank you for that amazing Talanoa. We'll just close up with this Fungu Fiverr. Malo.
Thank you, Saya, for sharing your gift with everyone. That was so beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Lilika to kind of close today's talk.
Aloha pito, kole ke hufanga, he whakatapu ko o si hono.
aufaki, ko hoku hingoa ko lilika I moana whanua funaki, ko ku fae ko anavanila taufa me hateho, pea ko ku tamai ko kalake whanua me homa. Ko au ko lahi taha I hoku famili na ku tupuhake I Hawaii, ka oko lo Tonganofo I Siapani. I was asked to close the Talanoa, and I just wanted to close by giving thanks, Deli, malohe ngawe, maloho ako, maloho puki puki whanua. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing space with us today. Thank you to those who organized for this Talanoa to happen today. Thank you now for facilitating today. And thank you to all of you who have come and contributed to this discussion. We are so grateful to just share space with those in our community. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, Malopito Ofatu.
Thank you.